What helped him ascend in politics could also be his downfall. That's the case for both Governor Pat Quinn and Bruce Rauner. That's coming up next on Capitol View. Legal troubles are haunting both the major party candidates for governor. We'll talk about that and much more on Capitol View, the show where we talk about state politics and government and what has gone on. I'm joined this week by Andy Maloney. He is the State House Bureau Chief, Springfield correspondent for the Chicago Daily Law Bulletin, and a man who is known everywhere for his expertise in all of this, Kent Redfield, Professor Emeritus with the University of Illinois, Springfield, and my former professor, so yay. Governor Pat Quinn had a rough week last week, but it just seems to continue. He had, before this program aired, gone on a bunch of Chicago television stations and tried to, loosen up a little bit and explain himself about some problems with the anti-violence program, the Neighborhood Recovery Initiative, that had been rolled out. Republicans say this is not coincidence, coinciding with his re-election, or his election the first time around, in 2010. All sorts of legal troubles with that. So why don't we start there in terms of Friday? Again, Governor Pat Quinn making the rounds, TV stations. How did that work for him, Andy?
Well, I think it's been a sort of a steady drumbeat of bad news ever since this kind of came out, and the Auditor General's report back in February shone another light on this. Of course, if you go back in 2012, people were already asking questions about this program, and I think CNN even came in and did a 4-month-long investigation on, how was this money spent? Who did it go to, and how exactly did anybody sort of better from it? But of course, as you indicated, he went on TV. This week, we have a legislative committee voting to grant themselves subpoena power and compel witnesses to come in and testify about this program. So it's been a drumbeat, as I said, of negative news.
So now we have our legislative bipartisan committee at least voting to give themselves subpoena power. It remains to be seen whether or not they will go forward. We'll get back to that, but that's on top of a federal investigation and the Chicago State's Attorney as well. But I don't want to leave yet how Quinn has been handling this. He is known and has been able to help himself in politics by being the good guy, the honest guy, the trustworthy one, who isn't all about politics. And now it seems that he is having a hard time keeping that reputation, because the accusation is that where there's obviously so much hurt, violence, continued deaths in troubled areas in Chicago, instead of using money to help youth there, money instead was going into the pockets of those with connections. So the wife of a state legislator, the husband, for example, of the Cook County clerk, who say, hey, no, we were just working. This was a job. But nonetheless, Quinn came on these TV shows and said, hey, as soon as I heard about it, I put a stop to it. That wasn't the storyline that a lot of these outlets went with, right? Because is that actually how it went down?
No, I think they're trying to make the best of what the timeline was and the activities, and I'm sure the governor never expected early in the campaign to be defending his basic brand, which is that he is Mr. Ethics, Mr. Integrity. And while I'm doubtful that this is somehow something that Pat Quinn personally benefited from, there's absolutely no question this was mismanaged from the beginning. When you have a scathing report from the Auditor General, who's the gold standard in Illinois, nobody questions Bill Holland's work. And so when they say, where are the contracts, where are the documentation? So this was a disaster. You were giving money to essentially local officials to make decisions about distributing money. which often doesn't work out well when we're talking about Chicago politics. And so, and
Not called the machine for nothing.
no, the storylines have changed, and he's trying to put the best face on it, but clearly this is not what he expected to be doing, which was defending kind of what is the foundation of his identity as a politician.
Well, and you said he didn't personally benefit, and it's not like Pat Quinn was, putting money into his wallet, but it does seem, or at least Republicans say, that he had the personal benefit of, lo and behold, he was able to win the election. Because you look at some of the results and where Neighborhood Recovery Initiative money went, turnout was greater than it was for Blagojevich, who was sort of a hero in some of these areas prior to his fall down.
No, strong political benefit, and that may be kind of not big news in Illinois politics, that politicians do things to benefit them politically, but tying it to this governor, who again has made, that we're turning the corner. This is a new era in Illinois politics, post Ryan, post Blagojevich. Then this is really,
Some of the same old stuff.
Yeah, it's damaging.
Why people hate politics.
There's no upside, and the question is just how bad is it going to be, and when is it going to play out?
And it's hurting Rahm Emanuel, I think, in a sense too, because one of the individuals, a former gubernatorial deputy chief of staff, Tony Irving, who was part of this program, is now leading up an anti-violence initiative in the city of Chicago, and so kind of taking hits there. I mean, to me, what's really upsetting about it is, again, there's still horrible. I mean, what is going on in Chicago constantly, especially as the weather gets warmer, the number of shootings every weekend, it just seems to be a shocking number. No matter how often you read it, the number of people that are shot is horrendous. In that this program is getting a lot of of attention for all of the politics, and yet I don't know. Should Quinn be in these neighborhoods? Should he be doing more? He says that this is a program that he shut down and at the same time stands behind.
Yeah, it's interesting to kind of go back and look, because a lot of people have used that terminology, right? This was well-intentioned as a way of getting folks who are in bad neighborhoods off the streets and doing something productive. And as Dr. Redfield said, that is part of Quinn's brand, is that it was a good sort of intentioned program. But now it's becoming increasingly difficult, I think, for him to sort of keep standing behind it, especially when you've got, now with the Legislative Commission, 3 sort of authorities who are kind of looking into this: the Cook County State's Attorney's Office, federal authorities here in Springfield, and now this Legislative Commission.
This Legislative Commission, though, if we have prosecutors on the federal level and the Cook County State's Attorney's Office looking into it, what's the General Assembly going to uncover? Is this just more politics from Republicans looking to beat up a Democratic governor as he tries to win against at least well-matched Republican in election year?
Completely. You can't separate the politics out of it. We see this all the time at the federal level, where we have sort of these investigative bodies or inquiries kind of probing at the question, but what it does is it kind of keeps the fire burning, and it keeps folks like journalists covering it on a daily basis, even if there is an undertone of, well, this isn't going to do anything substantive. We're still talking about it. It's still out there sort of in the general narrative during the election year, and I think that's certainly something that Governor Quinn doesn't want folks to be focusing on.
Is there anything to add there in terms of what this Legislative Commission could do, or even if it does? One of the co-chairs was the sole individual Democratic State Representative, Frank Montino, who voted against it. So even will there be subpoenas issued, or was this just a press pop? Nothing more is going to come of it? Or could you see, to me, I think timing is really part of it, because the legislature's on a different timeline than prosecutors.
Yeah, and it's not likely that this is not going to remind anybody of the House of Representatives Select Committee on Benghazi, or even the New Jersey committees that are looking into the bridge scandal with Governor Christie. It's going to be pretty circumscribed, and you can you can imagine getting some people in there talking about contracts and procedures and saying there's a legislative intent in terms of that. Anytime they get close to what actually was going on in Chicago, I think you're going to run up against the state's attorney or the U.S. Attorney's Office, who are going to say, we're really getting to areas here where you're interfering with criminal investigations and stuff. So it's got a very tight set of reins on it. You have to get 3 out of 4 of the 2 Republicans, 2 Democrats, 3 out of 4 have to approve a subpoena. It's not clear whether legislative leaders would actually have to sign off. And so I don't think you're going to see Governor Quinn testifying anytime soon in front of this legislative
The Auditor
commission.
General has already done. I mean, this is the summary report digest, so it's a little baby document here. But there is a wealth of information. If you go over to the Auditor General's office, that it was pointed out during this legislative committee. Republicans, if you're so interested in finding it out, why don't you head on over there? You're in the Capitol anyway. Go on over, check out the boxes, and you'll find a wealth of information, something that journalists have definitely doing, and as you said, Andy, a steady stream. Something that I guess really the media, to be frank, missed out on, because this was something that had occurred before Bruce Rauner even became the GOP's nominee. 4 days prior to the election in March, a federal bankruptcy judge in Florida declared that a case involving Rauner's former investment firm, the firm from which he made all of his money, that helped him clinch the nomination and has been given these massive, $1 million contributions to his own campaign, but in trouble for basically a subsidiary that got into the nursing home business. You may remember from the primary commercials that basically said, as Bruce Rauner was pocketing wads of cash, elderly people were dying because care in the nursing homes wasn't up to snuff, and they were trying to save money at the expense of these patients' care. It is now made news in Illinois that that case will proceed, so it appears it will continue to haunt him throughout the election. Dr. Redfield, is this a big deal, or it really is a complicated case? I know I read some of it, but the judge also said it reads like a legal thriller.
Yeah, no, it potentially is a big deal. We know that in the last presidential election that the Obama campaign made, scored a lot of points attacking the behavior of and the decisions that were made by the former investment firms by the Republican candidate Mitt Romney. And so, there's a story there in terms of what happens when big financial holding companies get a hold of companies and strip them of their assets, and the fallout from that. That's not a new story. You have to connect the dots in terms of how knowledgeable and complicit Bruce Rauner was in this story. And so we're sitting here saying, uber rich businessman benefits from taking over and running companies into the ground. Career politician benefits from corrupt deal, and the general public is sitting there and saying, I've seen this movie before. And so it probably hurts Quinn more than it hurts Rauner, because Quinn's kind of, the core of his identity is honesty and but
taxpayer money.
Yeah, but on the other hand, there's no question that what Rauner's business interests did and didn't do are going to be a continuing issue. It's just, I think Governor Quinn assumed he would be able to be fighting that battle without defending his own turf, and that's clearly not going to be the case.
And I think with Rauner, it continues to highlight this theme that we've seen nationally and also kind of trickled down to Illinois in terms of the theme of inequality. Every time, as Dr. Redfield indicated, that we talk about, what Bruce Rauner did with this firm and how much money he made, we're sort of using that magic phrase, multimillionaire Bruce Rauner. And I think that certainly plays into one part of the narrative, but who knows what sort of happens from here on that.
To me, it's very fair because Rauner continues to go, for example, this week before business groups and tout his record as somebody who has saved a bunch of money, gotten in the business world, brought coalitions together. And he says, for example, at a meeting of the Illinois Retail Merchants Association and Illinois manufacturers that gathered in Springfield, he said, hey, politicians, they coast on careers where they want to take credit for everything good and they want to pass the blame on everything bad. Go ahead, shoot the arrows at me, I'll take the blame. And yet, he, in this case, has said, hey, I don't know of any wrongdoing at nursing homes. It's different. Yeah, the investment firm had an ownership rule in it, but it was a different company. I didn't manage the nursing home stuff. And to me, I mean, it's interesting because you could say likewise that Quinn wasn't really running the Neighborhood Recovery Initiative. Yes, he thought of it, and he appears clearly from emails to have been more involved in that than with plenty of other state programs. There are thousands. But nonetheless, I mean, he's the governor, he's at the top, and other people are managing it. So I guess, to me, Rauner, who says, hey, I'm comfortable letting it play out in court, but that's not what this is about. This is different. How is it different? I mean, do you see the correlation between being able to run a business? How does that fit with being able to run a state?
No, I mean, that's always when you have successful business and running, they say, I understand how to get things done. And I'm successful in the private sector, that transfers over. History indicates sometimes yes, sometimes no. And then if you're able to attack the basic premise, which is that, I'm a successful businessman and I did this all on my own, pulling myself up by my bootstraps, then, that gets at the core of the narrative. And the poor voter is left there with kind of, noise from both directions without really having a sense that, who's going to, what does this mean to me? How are you actually going to solve my problems if we're sitting there just dirtying each other up, which is what we're likely to do for the next, 6 months.
It was remarkable to me to just observe the business leaders at this event. I have to be frank, I don't know how, correspondents that follow presidential campaigns for months on ends do it, because neither Rauner nor Quinn are in Springfield all that often, or at least publicly giving speeches. And I hear them say the same things all the time. Rauner with his joke with, he doesn't want, his daughter didn't want him to run for governor because he didn't want to go to jail. Quinn with his sayings, and Illinois is turning a corner. So just any word here as we go into really the important heavy-duty part of session where we are approaching a May 31st deadline. Either of you, predictions, hearing anything on the budget? Rauner told the business leaders, hey, I will be coming forward with a comprehensive plan one of these days. Who knows when? He says soon. Don't know when soon is. Wouldn't commit to before May 31st, but Illinois can go ahead and roll back the tax. Quinn says no, and look at the credit investment firms, look at now nursing homes, everybody who's coming on board with his plan so that Illinois doesn't have to lose all of that revenue. Just anything in terms of the budget. Speak now while we got about a month left.
Well, in terms of predictions, last year I remember very vividly being confident that a proposal on same-sex marriage was going to pass before the May 31st deadline, and I was completely wrong about that. So predictions, I don't have a good track record. But I do really think that the issue, and to sort of filter through all of the noise that we mentioned a little bit earlier of just attack after attack in the gubernatorial race, I think it's going to come down in large part on what happens with that income tax increase. I mean, we haven't seen legislation to this point, at least. We know things can happen fast when they need to around the State House. But I think a lot of it is going to depend on what happens there.
Pretty much all of it.
Right.
Yeah.
And I believe that you're going to get the votes in the House. You certainly have the votes in the Senate. Right. That doesn't mean it still couldn't fall apart. And if it falls apart, we're dealing with a very severe budget situation. And people outside the process that look at state finances from a more neutral standpoint, the numbers are very, very bad. And, keeping the tax increase will mean that we're going to go in the hole less slowly than if we let it expire. Unless we do major changes on revenue and expenditures, it doesn't appear we're going to do either. The governor's budget, has, if you add them up, $1 billion worth of new spending in terms of keeping that revenue. And so I don't think they're very, we really are not honestly engaging those issues. But I think that the horribles of letting it expire in terms of, both Republicans and Democrats understand, I think, what's there. Republicans are not going to give the Democrats any help, but there's certainly going to be a wink and a nod and a little, push in the back to, get out there and get it done, sort of thing. And so I think it will get done, and that we'll have a budget that is probably, half honest until we get into next year, and then we start all over again.
Speaking of the budget, education is one of the areas that Quinn says, at least, will face savage cuts if his budget plan and the extension of the income tax hike does not go forward. There's a proposal that's gotten a lot of attention that would not necessarily give more money to schools, but would change how it is that Illinois decides how much money it gives to individual districts. New numbers came out on that. Which of you is able to address that? It seems like there are some pretty clear winners and losers.
Right. And the caveat being that nobody talks about the school funding formula without first saying how complicated it is. It's very complicated, but this would very basically change how it's funded in terms of taking into account more the sort of poverty levels of districts, and move the formula so that the districts with fewer dollars and in poorer areas would get more state aid versus the wealthier districts, say like a suburban school district that's doing well off, would not get as much state aid. I think it's something like 90% is the number that's going to be shifted toward how much districts already sort of take in from property taxes.
And the merit of such a plan is supposed to be, according to those who advocate for it, that it's just not fair that your zip code decides how good your education is going to be, or at least how many dollars are put toward it in terms of computers, books, lessons, teachers, what have you. And that it's just not right that you have this disparity. And yet what you're hearing from those, so for example, State Senator Matt Murphy, who's from Palatine, a suburban area, he says, already my constituents are paying really high property taxes because their property values are high. They would take a monster hit under this. And whereas, sorry, it may stink, it may be that it's not great for some kids elsewhere. I'm worried about these kids that go to school here, and what are they going to do if their schools see such a major cut? Do you have any sympathy for that? Or they already have sky-high property taxes.
Well, and they have sky-high property taxes, and most of the wealth in the state of Illinois in terms of income generation is from the northeastern Illinois, and that goes into the general fund, and the general fund funds school. Mm-hmm. So, and they get a flat grant. A lot of these districts, they really don't qualify for any money under the formula. They just get a flat grant. And so it's about trying to get some kind of, not everybody equal, but at least narrow the disparity between rich and poor. As long as you've got to fund schools with a large component based on property taxes, and you've got big differences in wealth, you're going to have these kinds of problems. And what makes it so difficult politically is, all you need to know about this is to go to the State Board of Elections website, look at their breakout, and at the bottom they have this summary that says, well, downstate benefits,
downstate schools.
and suburban school districts don't, are the ones that are the losers. But the very first two printouts are school districts, individual school districts by state representative, and the next one is by state senator. And so every representative and every senator knows exactly what this does to every district, every school district within their legislative district. And so in order to spread the money around, you have to have some kind of hold harmless provision that at least lessens the impact. And so anytime we try to deal with these kinds of problems, we need a big chunk of change just to kind of take care of the people that are getting hurt, either completely or lessen the impact over time. And we have no extra money to put into hold harmless.
I mean, with all that spare change Illinois has, that's not a problem, right?
So it's a terrible problem. I mean, we could have equity tomorrow as long as we want to stop funding schools by the property tax and shift everything to the state income tax. And then we could distribute it on the basis of, we could devise a formula that wouldn't have an impact on local property taxes. That's not happening. And so this opens the conversation, but this is not something that's going to pass either house of the legislature this year. I think that's highly unlikely. Nobody wants to be on record with this kind of a vote,
especially in an election year. We started the show with legal troubles, or at least potential ones. Let's end it there in the legal world as well, particularly as we have you here, Andy. There was some legal action on two fronts. We'll see if we have time to get to them both. Let's begin with the legal effort to try and get both the constitutional amendments driven by Citizens Initiative of redistricting and instituting term limits off the ballot. What's the story there, and what are the chances, the legal arguments at play?
Right. So longtime attorney for House Speaker Mike Madigan, Mike Casper, filed a suit on behalf of a number of business leaders and minority.
Before these initiatives were even there, yeah.
Right. Minority group leaders challenging basically the constitutionality of changing how the legislature does redistricting, and also of the movement backed by Bruce Rauner to institute 8-year term limits on legislators. In both cases, generally he, in the suit at least, alleges that they're structural and procedural, that neither of these changes would qualify as a structural and procedural change, and therefore should not be allowed to be go forward, and the State Board of Elections should not spend money sort of looking at the petitions.
So we'll learn about that. I believe there is a court date set for June. Also on the legal side of the world, the State University Annuitants Association has filed the first, maybe there will be more, of an effort to try and put that new pension law to a stop for now. There's an ongoing case challenging the constitutionality of it. They say, well, that's ongoing. The pension law should not take effect in any way, shape, or form. So those are some of the many things that we will be following up on future weeks on Capitol View. Thanks for joining us, especially you, Andy Maloney of the Chicago Daily Law Bulletin, Kent Redfield, political scientist extraordinaire. Join us next week on Capitol View or online at networkknowledge.tv. I'm Amanda Vinicky.